Good day, everyone. We are from the Ethics Expert Group, and today we will be presenting our report on economic and technological ethics. So, this topic is very relevant to us as future business professionals because the decisions we make, whether in the economy or in law, how we use technology, carry real moral consequences. So, let's get started. To begin, let us first understand why we are discussing this topic. So, both economics and technology shape modern life, yet both raise serious moral questions. From how we buy and sell goods to how we communicate and access information. So, these two fields are deeply woven into our daily lives. However, with great power comes with responsibility, di ba? Both fields are serious moral questions that we cannot afford to ignore. And this report examines the ethical dimension of both fields and how they interact, explore, and how economics and technology are connected in terms of ethics. Let's start with economic ethics. Economic ethics examines moral principles governing economic activities, production, distribution, trade, and resource allocations, addresses fairness, justice, and responsibility in economic system. And simply put, it asks the questions, are we being fair? Are we being just? And are we taking responsibility for the economic decisions we make? And it is not just about making money. It is just about making money in the right way. Next is the technological ethics. So, technological ethics study of moral issues from the development and use of technology. Focuses on how technology impacts individuals, societies, and the environment. And as technology becomes more powerful and more present in our lives, it becomes more important to us. Is this technology being used responsibly? How does it affect individuals, communities, and even the environment? Technology ethics help us answer these important questions. So, next slide is how are the two connected? So, unsa may connected aning duha nila? So, first is technology drives economic growth and creates new models like gig work, digital economies. Well, first, all are made possible by technology. On the other hand, companies invest in technology to make profit, and sometimes in the pursuit of profit, ethical considerations are pushed aside. This tension between economics and technology is exactly why we need to study both together. Diba? And economics incentives shapes technology. Profit is often prioritized over ethics. There are four importance of economic and technological ethics. So first is human impact. Human impact unregulated practices cause real harm, like data breaches, unfair labor practices, and job loss. When economic and technological practices are left unregulated, real people get hurt. Think of data breaches that expose your personal information, unfair labor practices in supply chains, or workers losing their jobs due to automation. These are not just about issues. They affect real families and communities. Next is social stability. Social stability, ethical failures erode trust in markets and technology. When ethical failures happen, whether in markets or in technology, public trust erodes. And without trust, our economic and social system begin to break down. Third is sustainability. Sustainability ensures systems meet present needs without harming future generations. Means ensuring that our current economic and technological practices do not compromise the needs of future generations. We must build systems that can last. And finally is the global coherence. Global coherent shared standards manage cross-border challenges. It means in a world that is increasingly interconnected, shared ethical standards are essential. Issues like climate change, data privacy, and cross-border trade cannot be solved by one country alone. We need global cooperation guided by shared ethical principles. Let us move on to the ethical frameworks that help us analyze moral issues in these fields. We were looking at three major frameworks: consequentialism, deontology, and virtue ethics. So the first framework is consequentialism. So unethical frameworks that judge whether an action is right or wrong based solely on its outcome or consequences. If the results produce more goods than harm, the action is considered ethical. So in other words, the morality of an action is determined by the result it produced. If an action leads to more goods than harm, if it benefits more people than it's hurt, then it is considered ethical. So the most well-known version of consequentialism is utilitarianism, which aims for the greatest good for the greatest number of people. So how does consequentialism apply to economics and technology? So in economics, um, evaluating policies by their impact on poverty reduction or employment. So for example is, does this tax policy reduce poverty? Does this trade agreement create more jobs? So the focus is always on the real world outcome. So in technology, testing AI system based on their effect on user well-being. So in technology, a consequentialist would assess AI system or social media platforms based on whether they improve or harm users' well-being. For instance, does this algorithm help people find use information, or does it spread misinformation and cause harm? So the second framework is deontology. So a framework that focuses on duties, rules, and moral principles regardless of the outcome. Actions are ethical if they follow inherent moral rules or obligation, even if they lead to less favorable results. So according to this framework, some actions are inherently right or wrong, not because of what they lead to, but because of the moral rules they follow or violate. Even if breaking a rule might lead to a better outcomes, a deontologist would still say it is wrong to break that rules. So for the deontology applied in economics is upholding fair trade practices as a moral obligation. So deontology would say that upholding fair trade practice is not just a strategy, it is a moral obligation. Businesses have a duty to treat their workers, suppliers, and customers fairly regardless of whether being unfair might to more profitable. And in technology, is protecting data privacy as an inherent right of individuals. So, deontology would argue that protecting data privacy is not optional. It is an inherent right of every individual. Companies have a duty to safeguard personal information, even if collecting and selling data that would generate more revenue. The third and the final framework is virtue ethics. So, a framework that centers on the character and values of the person or organization acting rather than rules or result. It asks, what would a virtuous person do? It emphasizes traits like honesty, justice, and integrity. So this approach shapes the focus away from outcomes or rules and instead centers on the character and values of the person or organization making the decision. Instead of asking, what should I do? It asks, what kind of person rather should I be? Virtue ethics emphasizes moral traits like honesty, justice, courage, and integrity, and believes that a person with good character will naturally make good decisions. The virtue ethics applied in economics is encouraging businesses to prioritize integrity over short-term goal. So a virtuous business leader does not just ask, is this legal, but instead, is this right? And technology, virtue ethics
is fostering developers who value human welfare in design. So, virtue ethics calls for developers and tech companies to genuinely value human welfare in the way they design their products. It is not enough to follow regulations. Tech professionals should be motivated by a sincere desire to do good. Now, the comparing the framework. So now let us briefly compare the three frameworks side by side. So we have consequentialism that focuses on outcomes and overall impact, and the deontology that focuses on duties, rights, and rules. The outcome doesn't justify the means. And lastly, the virtue ethics that focuses on the character and intentions behind the decision. So each framework offers a unique lens for analyzing ethical issues, and in many real-world situations, we need all these three to get the full pictures. Now, let's proceed to ethical issues. Let us look at the major ethical issues that arise in economic and technological ethics. This includes poverty and inequality, labor exploitation, corporate responsibility, AI ethics, data privacy, and social media responsibility. So each of these issues can be analyzed using the frameworks we just discussed. For our case study today, we will be focusing on social media responsibility and specifically very relevant and local examples.
Now, let's us move forward to an example of social media responsibility. Our ethical analysis is titled Rappler versus Cyber Libel Charges. This case raises important questions about press, freedom, and the responsible use of technology in journalism. At the same time, gitan-aw pud nato diri kung unsaon pag-apply sa law sa digital content or online articles in the Philippines. So, this is not only a legal issue but also an ethical issue. Let us now examine the ethical problem in this case. In 2020, Rappler CEO Maria Risa and researcher Rinaldo Santos Jr. were convicted of cyber libel under the Cybercrime Prevention Act. The issue became controversial because the article involved was originally published in 2012, while the Cybercrime Prevention Act only became effective in 2014. Many critics, both local and international, believe nga this was not only about justice but also about press freedom. So para nila, mahimong kanang gigamit ang law aron ma-silent ang journalist nga naga-report against powerful individuals. So mao ni ang nakakos og dakong debate about ethics and freedom of expression. Looking at the other side of the issue, supporters of the ruling argue that the conviction was necessary to protect the reputation of individuals who may have been harmed by the article. They believe that freedom of expression should always come with responsibility. So, karon, we are faced with a very difficult ethical question. How do we balance free expression and accountability online? So, importante man jud ang freedom of speech in a democratic society. But at the same time, so kinahanglan pud nga dili makaspread og harmful or false information, and until now, society continues to struggle with this issue. Next, let us focus on details of the case. The article published by Rappler in 2012 discussed illegal activities involving a well-known businessman. Even though the Cybercrime Prevention Act only took effect in 2014, the court ruled that a small correction made to the article after 2014 reset the prospective period. So because of that interpretation, so nahimong liable sila under the new law bisan ang original article was written before the law existed. So many legal expert and press freedom advocate found this troubling because murag gi-apply ang law retroactively or backward. And for many people, this raises questions about fairness and proper application of the law. So now, why is this case important in real life? So the Philippines is considered one of the most dangerous countries for journalists in Asia. Platforms like Rappler are very important because they provide information that shape public opinion, business decision, and even government actions. If journalists or media organization are constantly threatened, mahalok ang uban nga mo report og important issues. As a result, the public may lose access in reliable information, and once the information ecosystem become weak, society and democracy can also be affected. This case, therefore, does not just affect the media, it affects how information flow in our entire society and economy. So lastly, this case also has economic impact. When media companies constantly face legal threat, investors and entrepreneurs may hesitate to support independent journalism. Because of that, mahimong ma-discourage ang growth of a healthy media industry. So this case also affect public trust, and trust is very important in the economy. Without reliable information, people cannot make informed decisions, markets may become unfair, and governments may avoid accountability. So this issue does not only affect Rappler or journalists, it affects the entire flow of information in our society and economy.
At this point, we will be tackling about the ethical analysis using major frameworks that was previously discussed to, I think, the second reporter. We will be tackling the ethical analysis, especially to the Rappler cyber libel case. So, this will help us to see the issue from multiple perspectives and maka-arrive at a more well-rounded ethical position. So, moving on to the next slide, we have here, as mentioned, we will be analyzing this case through the lens of the three frameworks, which is the first one, utilitarianism, deontology, and virtue ethics. So, each framework will give us a different way, mga klase-klase nga paagi, para ma-evaluate if kadto nga actions nga gibuhat to the people involved in the issue by Rappler and by the government. Was those actions ethical or not? So, let's first start with the first framework. Moving on, let's start with utilitarianism. So, utilitarianism is a kind of framework that looks at the overall outcome of the greatest good for the greatest number of people. So, we have here the perspective of utilitarianism. So, allow me to read it. So, protecting press freedom allows the public to access the truth and accurate information. So, this leads to better decision making, reduced corruption, and a healthier economy that benefits the majority. However, naadjure la inside, di ba, the positive and the negative. So, however, on the other side, if media is completely unregulated and false information spreads without freedom, individuals and businesses can be seriously harmed. So, the utilitarian question, aning a framework, is that does protecting Rappler's right to publish the article benefit more than it harms, or the other way around? So, now let's move on that we are finished sa nahuman ta sa utilitarianism, at let's move on to deontology. So, from a deontological perspective, as we all know, deontology focuses on duties, rights, and moral rules regardless of the result. So, here is the perspective of the ontology. Allow me to read it. From this view, every person has a right to a good reputation, diba? And every media organization has a duty to report truthfully and responsibly. But on the other hand, the ontology also strongly argues that laws should not be applied retroactively. What do you mean by that? So, meaning a person should not be punished under a law that did not exist at that time, nagibuhat nila ang action. So, applying a law retroactively violates yun the basic principle of fairness and the rule of law. So, from this view, the conviction of si Reza bitaog si Santos raises mga daghan, mga serious ethical red flags regardless of what the article said. So, we're done with utilitarianism and deontology. Now, let's move on to virtue ethics. As we all know, virtue ethics, from the perspective of virtue ethics, diba, we evaluates or this evaluates actions based on the character and values behind them. So, for journalists, the virtues expected are mga virtues na gin-expect someone nga journalist ka, truthfulness, courage, and a commitment to justice. Wherein, if you're in the government or for government authorities, the virtues expected nga naa nimo as a person, kay fairness, impartiality, and also, most importantly, kay transparency. So, we have here the perspective of so virtue ethics. From the perspective itself, pag human natughibaw sa perspective, we can say that virtue ethics ask us to look deeper good sa issue. So, was the, what do you call that one? Was the Rappler article published, na-publish ba ito siya with genuine intention of informing the public, or was it meant to harm someone, or na ba ito siya kanang purpose na makaharm sa ubang tao? Or on the other side, was the legal action nga gi-take sa government bitaw atong issue was taken up to genuinely uphold justice? Diba, there are a lot of questions yun nga atong ma-formulate. Or even, was it used to suppress criticism and intimidate the press? Diba, daghan kaayong questions, and these are questions that go beyond the law and touch the very characters or characteristic of those involved, ng mga tao nga involved atong issue. So, now that we have natagsa-tagsa na nato ang tulo ka mga frameworks that we critically analyze those, let's move on to the comparison of the different perspective, no. So, let's first move on to the points or the points of agreement nga among na analyze as a group. So, we have here points of agreement. So, all three frameworks agree that truthfulness is important. Whether you look at consequences, rule, or character, publishing false information is generally considered unethical. So there is also a consensus that laws must be clear and fair to be effective. So that's the point of agreement. So let's move on now to the next slide, the comparison of perspective in the point of disagreement. So we have here the points of disagreement. The first one is utilitarians might prioritize the greater public good and argue that even if some individuals are criticized, the public's right to know outweigh personal interest. So, what do you mean by that na prioritize to ang greater public good? So, it means that kanang if kadto bitaw nga issue is na prioritize pa ang greater good, or what is because someone kay na-criticize ba sila, or it is the public's right to know outweighs personal interest, as we said. Then the second one is that the ontologist might focus strictly on whether the law was applied correctly or whether basic rights were respected regardless of public benefits. So, giingon nga, the ontologist on the other hand, sa side sa the ontologist, they focus strictly good on whether katong law was applied correctly and whether, especially good, the basic rights ba ni Ressa o ni Santos were respected regardless of what the public might benefit from that certain article. And then, the third point of disagreement is that virtue ethics would focus more on intent. So here are some of the questions. No, was the report done to inform the public or to harm someone? Or was the legal action taken to uphold justice or to suppress criticism? So those are the point of agreement and point of disagreement. And now let's move on to the next slide, which is the reason, position, and recommendation. So, after carefully good na-analyze namo ang case through all of the three ethical frameworks, our group has arrived at a reasoned position and a set of recommendations. So, let's start first with our position. So, after careful and thorough analysis, our group has reached this position. So, we believe that while accountability is indeed necessary good to prevent the abuse of press freedom, the way the law was applied in this particular case raises serious ethical concerns. So, applying a law retroactively, that is, using a law to punish actions that occurred before the law even existed, creates yun a legal uncertainty and a set of dangerous precedents. So, this kind of uncertainty bitaw does not only harms the media industry but also weakens the broader economy by eroding public trust in institutions and especially discouraging honest and independent reporting. And now let's move on. Allow me to read our recommendations. So the first, based on our analysis, so we have three recommendations. So first, we have legal clarity. So what do you mean by legal clarity? Laws related to digital media and online content should be specific. clearly defined and should never be applied retroactively. So this ensures fairness, predictability, and respect for the rule of law. And the second one is responsible journalism. So responsible journalism means that media organizations, for their part, must also uphold high standards of accuracy, verification, and most especially good, ang transparency. Because press freedom comes with the responsibility to report truthfully and especially to correct errors promptly and openly. And the next recommendation, the last one, the third one, is balanced regulation. What do you mean by balanced regulation? No. So government policies should protect both the rights of individuals and the freedom of the press. So recognizing that a free, responsible, and independent media is not just a democratic level, but an economic necessity for the good governance and especially a well-informed society. And now, that ends our recommendation. So we have here as kanang a line that said, when we strike this balance, technology can be used to inform between freedom, again, when we strike this balance between freedom and responsibility, between individual rights and the public good, technology can truly be used to inform, empower, and build a more ethical society. And as we end this reporting, we leave you with a reflection. So, moving on, we have here the Ethitech Expert Group reflection. Our reflection as a group. Allow me to read it. So, ethics is not just something we study, it is something we live. Every economic decision and every technology we use together, the Raptor case reminded us that standing for the truth, fairness, and justice takes courage, and the courage starts with us. As future professionals, and especially as future public administrators, let us choose to act not just for profit or convenience lang, but for the greater good. And that concludes our report on economic and technological ethics. And on behalf of the Ethitech Expert Group, Aguatis, Beloy, Castañeda, Estologa, Dayon Latras, Nina Agusal, we thank you for listening and God bless.